Medea is a piece of classic Greek text. It is also an example of the Greeks looking at ways to break their own formulas. Euripides chose to break the formula of using the voice of a god or some other worldly being to give the prologue or the introduction to the story. And in this one, it's a nurse. It is an everyday working class character who happens to know Medea so well. To me, that was really intriguing, that already he's starting to break a certain formula. On top of that, it is such a strong story about how a woman who is a refugee is faced with so many different challenges and how she tries to adapt to all of these challenges and, in fact, adapt to the new environment that she has to live in. Because anyone who's ever been a refugee or an immigrant to a country has a unique experience in front of them. And unless you've experienced it, it's hard to wrap your brain around. Everything is simple as, gosh, I'd really like to have that one snack that I'm used to having, and you can't find it anywhere in the new country. So for me, those are kind of the main reasons why I wanted to do Medea. For me, a lot of the focus is Medea's journey, but also the world that she's having to live within. So focusing on the world of the play, Corinth, being a more conservative culture than what we here in Central Europe are used to, helps create an environment of someone who's an outsider trying to adapt to a new environment and recognizing the challenges they're facing. Right now, here in Germany, we have massive immigration, and it's not going to change. We have to get used to it, and we have to start to learn to adapt to the new possibilities and the new people coming into our culture. Look at doner kebab. Doner kebab is a major example of an immigrant population bringing something with them, and then in the new population turning it into something special. And now it's turning into a national dish here in Germany. So that's a real positive example. There's a lot of challenges that we face because whenever you're an immigrant, you can't expect the new population to adapt to you. You have to learn how to adapt to it. This is why often in immigrant communities, you see little Italy's pop up, little China's pop up, little Japan, little whatever pop up, because the community is looking for a sense of what they left. And another thing that I think a lot of people need to understand is that a lot of these immigrants that come and go, they don't leave because they want to. They leave because they have to. Medea is a perfect example of that. She left because she had to, because of choices that she made. So for me, the world of the play, it's very important that we show a world that she's living in that is outside of what she and her entourage or household is accustomed to, and how she's trying to adapt to it through a filter of her own trauma. It's been a real challenge to reconcile some of the more mythological elements of the story to a modern perspective. I love doing Greek plays because I think they are extremely universal. They talk about a lot of subjects that challenge all of us even today. So taking one of the stories and putting it into a modern world, I don't see that as such a stretch. What becomes a stretch is, how do we reconcile that mythology? Well, for me, as a fan of fantasy, science fiction, and alternative storytelling, I love the idea of using some of those more magical realism elements to help establish the supernatural that already existed in the ancient Greek version. I'm an American. I come from the American theater, and the tradition of magical realism in our theater is rich and robust, and it's been there for decades. So I think for a lot of modern audiences, not just international audiences, but even our local German audiences, they'll see that magical realism, and for them coming to the theater, it's not that hard to connect the dots. So to answer the question, I think there's tons of parallels between the ancient world and today. We just need to figure out what the paradigm is. Is it technology? Is it magical realism? Is it dream states? Is it surrealistic worlds? Hard to say. You choose. You're the one making the story. For us, there's one thing that we did play a lot with, and that is dancing back and forth between stylized representation and realism. And when anybody comes to this play, we will snap back and forth between those pretty fluidly. And I think that helps reconcile some of the more mythological elements in the story. You know, when we're talking about a Greek play that was written 2,500 years ago in an ancient version of Greek, just the fact that we have it today, it's probably been filtered a few times. Maybe Michael went directly to his own ancient Greek and pulled it from there. Either way, we are so far away from the original that it's going to be almost impossible, unless we do it in ancient Greek, to actually grab a hold of the original element and feeling of it. But the plot still exists, the character development still exists, and the main storyline still exists. That we can take, we can turn into our own modern poetry, and then share that with an audience so that they don't feel like, what in the hell am I watching? This is so confusing. Because even in some of the translations I've worked on with Greeks, when you look at the ancient Greek and then you try to put it even into modern Greek, it's a real challenge because there's so many archaic references to things we just don't experience. I do a lot of Shakespeare, and I'm a big fan of making sure we try to stay as true to his work as possible. I feel that way about any playwright. I'm a very playwright-centric theater maker. That being said, there are certain jokes that an Elizabethan audience is going to laugh their heart out at. And a modern audience is going to look at and say, what? So we have to be sensitive to that. We can't try to offer an archaic concept to an audience where it's just going to simply go over their head. On top of that, we have to be sensitive. We're talking about an audience. Our audiences are multinational, multilingual audiences. Half of them are coming at this as a second language. And so what I loved about Collier's translation is that it's poetic, it's elegant, it is really pliable for the actors to work with. And so because of that, it makes a lot more sense for the audience when they come in to try and take it in. David and I have collaborated on a couple of projects together. We work really well together. I enjoy the collaborations. And so this time I offered him, I said, let's explore. Let's see when you take in the play, how does that translate into music for you? The only parameters I gave him was I'd like to hear an ancient tone color. So I wanted to make sure that we had elements of older musical instruments incorporated within. And yet, when you hear the music, it is very modern. It's very rich, it's very textured. He's layered a lot of different melodies on top of other melodies, along with rhythm that is supporting the entire thing. One of the things that he strived for was character placement and development based solely on music with a particular character. So the chorus has their own soundtrack. Medea has her soundtrack. Jason has one, Creon has one, The Messenger has one. So when you hear the new pieces of music or you are experiencing certain sections of music, it helps inform what characters that's connected to. Now, this is a formula we've been working with in opera and in musical for centuries. I often look to the past when it comes to working on and creating the theater that we create, because there's a lot of tools that have already been developed that we don't need to redevelop. And using music to identify with character or with a particular scene is a great way to get an audience that's already still struggling with maybe a plot line or even text to start to connect the dots better. So if we can connect the dots for an audience on one level, a second level, and even a third level, they're going to understand the piece even more intimately. And as a director, I have no time, no use, and no interest in a piece of theater that is just bodies moving around stage for no reason. I want to see something that tells a story. Get creative, get weird. I don't mind weird at all. I love it. But tell me a story. Don't be a coward and tell me a story. And that's what we're trying to do, is tell a really strong story here. David's music really helps support that. It is all built around modesty culture. We based everything in the costume design on our world, our own world of the play. There were some modern modesty cultures that we looked at, but in an attempt to be culturally sensitive, we didn't necessarily pull from one culture and say, okay, it's this world that you're in. You're in this city or you're in this city. What we chose to do was look at modesty culture as a whole and then try to adapt that to our world of the play. You might see elements that you might go, oh, well, that looks like something I've seen in this culture or this culture. Well, one thing we need to understand is we're talking about a story from the Mediterranean from 2,500 years ago. It's hot. And certain times, costume pieces, cultural costume pieces, haven't changed over 2,000 years. So you might see things that look ancient, you might see things that look modern, and my goal is to make sure that we're just creating our own world of the play. Every time you come to see a play, you're not looking at the real world or the new world or this world. You're looking at a multiverse. You're looking at a possible permutation of our world. And so within that, we can get as creative as we want. And in fact, we should be getting as creative as we can. I'm pretty lucky because this team of actors is on point with their history. They are aware of the ancient world. They're interested in the ancient world. And so a lot of the mythological elements, all of them, they dove right into it like, oh yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, okay, sure, I get that. Oh, we need to create a ritual. Or what god would my character believe in? All of them dove into it head first without any kind of reservations or questions. So in terms of exploring this particular play, I am not being an American hyperbolic when I say this. It has been a spectacular process with every actor coming in excited and with the tools to look at the ancient world. And yet, how can we put that into today? Nobody really struggled with any of the concepts I was offering or trying to establish. So there wasn't a lot of reconciling that we had to do. Everybody was on board from the beginning. They hopped on board our version of the Argos, and we just went right out to sea. And it's been great so far.